Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el Jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
It's the left versus the right. In the right corner,
it's Congressman Peter King.
In the left corner, it's Governor David Paterson. Live from Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate.
Good afternoon, everybody. Left, right, left. This is the left versus the right. I'm David Paterson on the left, and my co-host and guest and great friend is here with me today, Peter King. And, of course, we're on opposite sides of the spectrum, but deep down, we hate each other. No, that's not the case. But, Peter, here we are, the end of another week in the first couple of months of President Trump's turn, and there was a turn on Friday. The stock market was up. The Dow Jones average is now 41,335. It went up 1.7% on Friday. And the S&P 500 is now 602.30, I believe, and they were up 1.78%. And everyone else followed them. With everything that's been going on, what do you attribute this totally unforeseen change in the market?
Well, first of all, Governor, it's great to be here with you. You are a great friend. You're a great governor, a great public servant, just a great guy. And you also have a wonderful wife. Mary is terrific. I don't know how she puts up with you, but she certainly does.
She would agree with you about that.
As far as the volatility, I think it's part of Donald Trump's first 5-6 weeks in office. There's never been a president who has come on as strong as he has, done as much as he has, as many unexpected things. Everyone thought they knew all there was to know about Donald Trump, but I don't think anybody expected tariffs to be going the way they are. I don't think people expected that he'd be so actively involved as much as he is with Ukraine, so much with the European countries, with China, with everything. But I would say it's probably the tariffs. He was saying all during the campaign he was for tariffs, but I don't think anybody realized it would be this extensive. I think the markets are trying to react to that. But I think underlying the economy is strong. So I think the volatility we're seeing is they're not yet certain which direction or how far President Trump is going to carry this out, how long-range his program is. And so I think we may see more ups and downs as we go along. It's maybe a roller coaster ride. What consoles me is that I think the underlying economy is strong. And I do think in the end, Donald Trump will straighten even make it stronger, and we'll keep going forward.
Well, Peter, since you're articulating the right point of view, and I'm articulating the wrong point of view, the left point of view, I have to concede, if you take out what's going on with the market, things have gone pretty well. The inflation issue has not creeped up as it was expected to. The cost of homes has not gone up. Most of the price indexes have gone down, and so basically, Americans are not in any sort of peril over this. And if this is what the leader of the free world feels that he has to do to try to get some of these foreign countries in line, then you can certainly understand it. It was just shocking to me because when I watched the news back a couple of days ago, Thursday night, I thought, what is this guy doing? I mean, we're gonna have a recession or a crash, and but from the looks of things, just 48 hours later, it's a lot different.
Yeah, I think it shows, again, the inherent strength of the economy. And also, I do think that most people believe, or they agree or disagree with Donald Trump. The bottom line, he is a businessman, and he's not going to let this get out of control. But he is willing to take chances. He is willing to take risks. And he certainly likes to walk the tightrope. But in the end, like with his first term, without starting a whole debate over his first term in office, the fact is the economy, until COVID came along, the economy was good, inflation was low, employment was high, we weren't in any wars. So with all of the instability he may create day to day, overall there is a sense of stability, I think, with Donald Trump. But we have to say, he is, you and I are sort of grasping here, trying to figure it out, because we've never had anyone like Donald Trump before. So we're trying to make sense out of what he's doing, but there's nothing to compare it to.
The closest I can think of is that in 1933, when the presidents were still sworn in March, on March 4th, 1933, that's when President Roosevelt came into office, and he kind of had a plan for each day for that month and into April of 1933. President Trump had half the time to put his, initial salvos together. But when he came in on January 20th, I don't think there's a day that's gone by that he hasn't announced something different that he's doing. It wouldn't have seemed humanly possible to me. And even though I'm not his biggest fan and don't agree with him plenty of times, I've got to tip my hat, as you should, to someone who has found a way to make government easier to understand and operating as quickly as possible.
What makes you so? I agree with you with FDR. He came in, the New Deal. It was program after program, many executive orders. What was a little different then, though, he did have a whole brain trust around him, advisors. I think most of this is being done by Donald Trump himself. That makes it a little bit different here.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
Whether you like him or you hate him, it's amazing that somebody can do that. And it's not like this guy's 42 years old, but he's just, really, in many respects, at the peak of his capacity right now, in a time when the country really needs it. And in that regard, what did you think of Senator Schumer? We could have had a shutdown after yesterday, and he's decided to give as many votes as he can to the Republicans. And what's interesting about that is that I've been hearing from a number of different sources that if you just look at that budget and you don't think about who wrote it, it's a budget that a lot of people in Congress and the Senate really like. Some of the things that Biden did are still in there. And for members of my party to be trying to shut down the government when this budget is probably the best one they'll ever see, in my opinion, is callow and puerile.
Well, I like those words. But basically, you're right. It's continuing it's continuing the Biden budget until September 30th. And the Democrats, they say it's going to put veterans out of work. It's going to kill Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. The fact is, this doesn't affect that at all. I mean, that may happen. We have to see what happens on in the final budget for next year. But this one is just basically to buy time to put together what's called a reconciliation package, for next year's budget, and then we can have a debate on all these issues. Now, no one wants to take away Social Security or hurt Medicare, hurt Medicaid. Democrats can make the argument on next year's budget that could be the impact of some of the decisions made, but to attach it to this. I mean, I see Democrats saying, if this goes through, we're going to all veterans are going to lose their job. This has nothing to do with that. That's and I think it's right. And now with Chuck Schumer, again, Chuck is a very smart guy, very good from New York. I got to say that. I think he realizes that, and I've been on the other side of this. I've been when the Republicans call shutdowns, they never work. You never get what you want. You look bad, and you end up coming back in full retreat. I think Chuck realizes that, and he also realizes if they're going to have a war and you're going to go to battle, you're not going to do it over a budget, which really is this temporary 6 months, which is going to have minimal significance, minimal impact. And but he has a progressive wing in his party. I mean, he's definitely getting pushback, like the AOCs of the world, implying they're going to do a primary against him, and so he has to. And a lot of those Senate Democrats are not what you see up in Albany here. I mean, these are guys from western states, southern states, and so you can't be far out left.
Far more to the center than
exactly.
California, New York,
right.
Sometimes Massachusetts, sometimes Maine. Their governor went out of their way to get into a fight at the National Governors Association visit to the White House. And I was coming around to asking you about this. If you had been a Democrat, now I don't want you to break out in hives right now. I just want you to
I'm leaving the show right now.
Or let's just say you were in the party that lost in November. Right. And the party that won is starting to do all these things that are really frightening people in your base and that situation. So I can understand that a lot of these legislators are fearful, but how would you have handled this differently than these unprovoked, horrible situations? They wouldn't even cheer a 13-year-old survivor. Then the woman who was hit with a volleyball, when they brought her out, they had no reaction to it. They just sat there as if, they were waiting to be arrested or something. And I just feel that it's a breakdown in communication and a breakdown in ethics and honestly a breakdown in faith. For people to understand, hey, you lost the election. Sooner or later, the other side's going to make a mistake, whoever it is, and you're going to get your chance. But it just seemed like tumult from the minute that the electoral votes caused Donald Trump to be president for the second time.
I think my oversimplified answer is that what's really changed about politics is, for the most part, there's no political organizations. People don't go out and get petitions signed, go door to door, go to train stations. They really have not dealt with that many ordinary people. They live in silos. They live where they hang out with their progressive group. Like in our party, we have people, all they know is other, very conservative people. So they've never really seen or dealt with the other side, never had to. And the way congressional districts are drawn today, probably 90% of them, you couldn't lose if you wanted to. If you're a Democrat in certain districts, the Democrat's going to win. The Republican's going to win. But what they are afraid of is losing the primary. I use the example of we had Eric Cantor, who was probably the most conservative. He was the majority leader and probably the most conservative majority leader ever. And he lost in the primary by 10 or 12 points to a guy no one ever heard of because the talk show media found some amendment he had voted for involving immigration 5 years before, and that became the whole campaign. And in the primary, you and I would probably agree a very small percentage of voters come out, but the hardcore will always come out. So let's say 20% comes out in a primary, but 15% of your party is extreme. Well, that 15 is going to come out and outweigh all the others. So people are afraid of going against their base, but they live in silos, they live in echo chambers, and they think that everyone thinks like they do, not knowing that the rest of the country looking at you thinks you're crazy. And that's true on both sides. Now it's more pronounced on your side, David. But, that to me, I thought Trump gave a very effective speech in the State of the Union or the Congressional Address, what they call it. But I think more impactful for him was where the Democrats acted. I think that he may move the needle slightly. The Democrats moved the needle even more so for him by the way they were carrying on.
To the point that when he did something that I really thought was appalling, it was when the aircraft fell into the Potomac, and within 3 hours, he's talking about it and somehow turns it around as an assault on the former Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, and Biden. Now, listen, even if they were guilty as charged, that wasn't the time to say that. That was a time to pull the country together, not just to say prayers for the families of those who were killed in the plane crash, but for all the people who felt so badly for them. That was a time to reinforce it, and he didn't do it. But interestingly enough, because of all of the Democratic tirades, it wasn't as roundly criticized in the media as I thought it could have been because, people just saw that as maybe retaliation. But I think that at some point, it's easy to say, whether we're Republican or Democrat, whether we're rich or poor, we've got to pull together and be Americans. But it's a nice thing to say. It sounds great. People say it in churches. But the point is, it's really not helping our country get to the great achievements that we have over the number of years before now.
Yeah, I think there are times when the country has to stand together. And you're right, not just in a ceremonial way, but if there is a tragedy, there's always time later on to determine what the cause of it was, what the reason was. To be jumping in like that is wrong. I thought it's like some Democrats, not as much as you probably have today, after 9/11 said somehow President Bush was responsible. And we can carry that forward. I mean, Republicans have done the same thing to Clinton, to Biden. To me, a tragedy is a tragedy. You resolve it at the time, and then You quietly go ahead, have hearings, investigations, and you make your findings. And I think you and I would agree there's very seldom do you find that anyone is all wrong or all right. There's enough human error involved, and it could be intentional, it could be not intentional, it could be negligent, or it could just be the fact that you don't get everything right. And we have to take that into account. So there's enough we can fight about and argue over without taking advantage of any kind of tragedy.
Now, as a congressman, of course, indigenous to Long Island, and served for the long period of time that you did, were there any times when you were in Congress when it felt just the anguish that we feel at this particular moment with the acrimony going back and forth between the parties?
Yeah, there was some of that when Bill Clinton came in. I got elected the same year as Bill Clinton. For some reason, the media gave more credit to Bill Clinton than they did to me. But both of us were elected at the same time. And he was from a different generation from most people who were in Congress at the time. He was considered part of the anti-war movement he was in. So he was looked upon as, which is really interesting because today he's considered almost a conservative, but then he was considered some radical, wild man coming in. And I remember on the Republican side, when you enter the Capitol, into the House of Representatives, the main doorway you go in just happens to be on the side where the Democrats sit. I remember going in with a guy from Alabama who would actually walk all the way around, take an extra 3 minutes to get in because he didn't want to even walk on the Democratic side of the House.
Wow.
So you had some of that. And then you had people who wouldn't show up at the State of the Union, but it's much more pronounced now. Then it was like 2 or 3 people here, 5 people there. There's some antagonism. And then the Democrats sort of reacted the same way when you had Clinton elected in 92 and then Newt Gingrich in 94. That was the first time Republicans had a majority in the House in 40 years.
Right.
40 years, the first time. And Newt Gingrich was very provocative, very out there. And so Democrats went crazy doing all they could against Gingrich. So we had 2 years of warfare. We had a government shutdown, which is a bad idea.
Right, 95.
Yeah, and I was terrible. But if you listen to Republicans every day, we were winning that because everyone they spoke to in their small clubs told them it's great. Meanwhile, every day we were losing popularity and going down. And that could have been why Bill Clinton got reelected the next year. But anyway, both Gingrich and Clinton, I think, learned something from that. And the last 2 years of the first term, 97 and 90, Clinton got reelected in 96. So for 97 and 98, were 2 of the most productive years I think we've had in Congress. There was a balanced budget. There was welfare reform. There was basically agreement. Both the Gingrich people and the Clinton people realized the necessity of getting along, not holding hands and kumbaya, but finding ways to get results. And then, of course, then in 98, unfortunately, we had the whole Monica Lewinsky thing and impeachment, which made things more partisan than ever. But for that, let's say, 18-month period,
a whole lot got done.
A lot got done, and it was a different attitude in Congress. You could actually be seen walking over to vote with a Democrat, standing with him, talking to him along the way.
In many ways, they emulated President Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, how they'd have a glass of scotch and then everything was worked out. So,
and if I could just add, I know somebody who worked on Tip O'Neill's staff, and he said that they always felt that Reagan liked Tip O'Neill more than Tip O'Neill liked Reagan. He thought Reagan was an amateur coming in. Having said that, he realized he was the president, and he realized he had to get things done. So there was never any hard feeling between the two of them. So it wasn't necessarily a natural friendship, but it was a relationship they formed, and they thought it was best for their party and for the country to get things done, and they did.
Wow. No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just some permanent interests. Right. So we're going to come back in a couple of minutes and continue this. We are on the left versus the right here on WABC Radio. And if you get tired of us, Vinny's going to come on at 5 o'clock and play music until Cousin Brucey.
He's great. Vinny, great guy.
Absolutely. And who knows what will happen after that. But right now, we're going to take a break, have a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
It's the left versus the right. It's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC. It's the left versus the right. It's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
We're back here on 77 WABC. It's the left versus the right. I'm David Paterson, representing the left. Peter King, representing the right, and everything that is right, is here
I like that.
with me. We're having a good time, and we hope all of you are. The choice was for the two of us to sit here and talk or to throw chairs at each other for an hour, and we hope that we chose the former.
Well, it's not over yet. It's not
Yes,
over
exactly.
yet.
So, living in Long Island, as you have, obviously you hear the day-to-day media reports, and there is a race going on right now for mayor of the city of New York. There's a Democratic Party that has I'm just getting breaking news, 13 candidates are running in the Democratic primary. And then Curtis Lewa is probably not going to be challenged and will run as a Republican. But one of those candidates is the current mayor, Eric Adams. And one of those candidates running against him is the former governor, Andrew Cuomo. Now, this is a lot. Just wanted to get a little feedback from an old political thinker on this subject.
You know, actually, I've been in Long Island now for over 50 years, but I was born in Manhattan, I was raised in Queens, and went to high school and college in Brooklyn. And my father was on the NYPD for over 30 years. So I have a lot of roots in New York City. I follow it closely.
So your car would never get stopped by congestion pricing because you've been in all these places before.
That's right. Here you go. And, here you go. And also I've gotten to know most of the mayors, David Dinkins, Giuliani, Bloomberg, de Blasio, and now Eric Adams. I still think it's the toughest job in the world, and it's even more so now because the city council, I think, has gone so far to the left, it's making it hard for a mayor to be moderate or down the middle. And just you have so many issues involving labor, involving business, involving education. We're still coming back from COVID. You have the crime issue. But I think a mayor can do it. I think certainly LaGuardia did it. Rudy Giuliani, people disagree with him, but the thing is he did get the city straightened out. I think that Mike Bloomberg showed a business person can do it. And I'm not being overly critical of Eric Adams. He's in a tough spot. Giuliani never had to deal with the city council, the way Eric Adams does. I mean, when Giuliani was the mayor, you had Peter Vallone as the Democratic speaker, and they could find ways to work together. Having said that, maybe you need a Vince Lombardi to come in as the mayor. But I think a strong mayor, if I were advising someone, I would say that they should assume they're going to be a one-term mayor, go as hard as they can, as tough as they can, build up support among the people, challenge those who are trying to hold things back, and see what happens. Now, of all of them, I think Andrew Cuomo was an effective governor in his first 2 terms. When he puts his mind to it, I think he can get the job done. Obviously, he's has had some tough moments then near the end as governor, but he can be an effective governor. Eric Adams, I wouldn't write him off yet, even though it's going to be tough. As far as the others, to me, it's just like a mass of very progressive, very ultra-liberal. In fact, liberal today isn't even what it used to be. So very progressive-minded candidates. I don't know who among them could ever come close to Cuomo. But again, as you know and I know, elections are strange. Anything can happen. But Cuomo is probably the one who looks best suited on the Democratic side. Curtis is Curtis. He knows the city inside out. He's going to need a break to win because it is a 7-1 Democratic majority. But I think most attention is going to be focused on Andrew Cuomo. So you can almost say it's his to lose, which can happen.
Yes. Now, for Curtis, it would have to be a splitting of the vote, saying, let's say that the moderate Democratic vote is split between Adams and Cuomo. Then the kind of activist vote of the other 4 or 5 candidates in that is divided enough that enough Democrats vote, but none of them gets enough votes to clear 40%. Then you've got, in the primary they win, but then that person would go on to run against Curtis, and I just don't see, it's not about Curtis, but I just don't see a Republican winning the mayoralty this year. I don't think the votes are there. And it's just New York City. If it was all New York State, like what Governor Kathy Hochul will face next year, that might be a little more of a problem because the state is bigger and they're different communities, and the communities think differently from each other. So I kind of think that it's going to be a long haul, even though that primary contest will be held at the end of June. So that's 4 months from now, or 3 months from now. And that's going to be a little difficult. So that's kind of how I see it. But the very interesting aspect to all of this is how many people want to be mayor. And I am going to, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring down the cone of silence. The audience can't hear us. What it is that there are a few people who suggested that I run for mayor.
Right, I've heard that from a number of people.
There are a few people who I more than respect, like the owner of this station, who has suggested it to me plenty of times. I get the creeps when someone asks me if I want to be mayor because you're nonstop in front of the public. I was kidding around with former Governor Cuomo. We were having lunch, I think it was about 6 months ago, and he was talking about maybe running for mayor. I said, come on, if you ran for anything at all, you would run for governor. And he said, why is that? I said, because first of all, in Albany, half the people don't even know where the governor lives. Right. I don't even think they know that the governor stays in Albany. And in Gracie Mansion, if you put your head in front of the window, cameras start going off. You are constantly under that microscope. So you were right about how difficult that job is, but there are some very skilled people who are running, and we'll just see where that actually goes. Why don't we get back to some of the...
I said one thing about being governor. I'm saying this from a guy who's never in Albany. But when you're in Albany, you're not dealing with issues day to day. The governor can almost pick and choose when or where he wants to get involved. You're the mayor. Every minute of your day has to be accounted for. Every time you walk down the street, somebody's mad at you.
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. Now, in terms of what's going on with the Ukraine and their issues with Russia and Russia's issues with the Ukraine and President Trump warning both of them and then going back and forth warning both of them, do you think he has an overall structure in his brain that he wants to impose on this process? Because up to this point, what he says about one of them in the morning is totally different than what he says about the other in the same entity, whether it's the Ukraine or Russia. And I'm starting to get the feeling that other countries are frightened by what the end of this could actually be. What do you think about that whole issue in Europe and in Russia?
You know, my views are different from a number of people here at the station. For one thing, I strongly support Ukraine, yet I think this goes beyond Ukraine. This is basically, since 1939, no European nation has invaded another sovereign nation. And after World War II, the agreement was made, the understanding came about that the European had to stand together because not one of them was strong enough to stand up to the Soviet Union by themselves, but in unity they could. And the United States, as we're brought into two world wars and the world is getting smaller, the United States had to be part of that alliance, that Atlantic Alliance, if you want to call it. And from 1945, 1946, 1947 until 2022, there was no independent country was invaded by another. So this could cause a dismantling. If Putin is allowed to prevail in any way in Ukraine, it's not just a territorial fight. It's Russia expanding itself. Is Poland necessarily going to stay tied to us? Is Germany going to stay? Or they're going to make their own economic deals with Russia? Because Russia will then become, and if we withdraw from Europe, that could make Russia the dominant economic and political force in Europe, and that whole alliance that took 80 years to put together could become dismantled. So I would hope that President Trump, listen, it's not going to go back to the pre-war boundaries, but it should be made clear that Russia has to give up something and stop. And more important than that, there has to be some security provider there. It doesn't have to be NATO. That could be maybe provocative, even though, anyway, it could be provocative. But if England, France, other countries want to put in peacekeeping troops along the border, to me that's important because Ukraine, otherwise, we could have, Neville Chamberlain secured peace in Munich.
I remember that video. A lot of us saw it in school, when they had the films about what happened in World War II, and Chamberlain comes off the plane and he's got this piece of paper in his hand and he says, "I bring you peace. I bring you peace."
Peace in our time.
In our time, and his time ran out about a half hour later. But how long have you been teaching history, Professor? That was quite a demonstration here.
I just think it's important that this alliance, listen, with all the faults that Europe has, and I can give you almost every country you can find fault with. However, as a unit, Europe is closer to our sense of values. We have a common, for the most part, we have common interests, and that's to not have invasions by other countries and to try to work things out economically if we can. Tariff wars, that's fine, but we should not do anything to dismantle that alliance. And what actually indicated to me the importance of it is you had countries like Sweden and Finland who, during the height of the Cold War, refused to join NATO. They thought it wasn't necessary. Now they both ran to get into NATO because they see the possibility. In the past, they felt totally protected by NATO. Now they see Russia on the move and Europe not being as strong as it should be. So you had Sweden and Finland both fighting to get into NATO, something they had avoided for 60, 70 years.
Now, a country that is certainly observing, but we haven't talked about yet, but I'm sure they are definitely counting their opportunities and their policy, would be Germany. And their economy is great over there right now. Do you feel any, not military, but just intervention of Germany because of their economic standing these days on this process?
I think Germany may be watching because Germany, one of the reasons this great alliance was set up in Europe was to keep Germany from becoming too powerful again. It's important that Europe rearm more and strengthen itself, but if Germany rearms more than the others, and they may see an opportunity even to somehow work out energy issues and economic issues with Russia. So I'm not sure where Germany would go, but there were centuries where France and Germany, Austria, Hungary, the British, they were all fighting, and we ended up getting dragged into those wars in the 20th century. And I'm afraid of that order. George H.W. Bush got in trouble for using the term a new world order, or the world order. But there has been order, and with all the faults, all the deficiencies, all the fact that Europe doesn't pay all its bills, we have not had a land war in Europe except for the down the Balkans, and that was just within those countries, made of Yugoslavia, and that was resolved. That's another example. That war was going on, I don't know, a couple of years, and European countries said they couldn't do anything about it. The United States got involved. Bill Clinton got involved. We ended it in 5 weeks. A war that's, I remember having all these foreign ministers meeting us in Washington, acting like we were the uneducated ones. Once we get involved, it's going to go on forever. Well, Bill Clinton said enough. He ended it in 5 weeks. So U.S. power is essential to it, but we can't be doing it all. So we got to find a middle ground where Europe becomes stronger, but also our relationship with Europe, because we can't be isolationists. In fact, I just finished reading a book about the America First movement in the late 30s, and all those arguments at the time actually seemed to make sense. How the ocean's between us, it's not ours, and then you realize once Pearl Harbor and once Hitler came about, we were part of it, and we got dragged in and lost thousands and thousands of American lives.
And speaking of Hitler, there are a lot of extreme groups going on, even right here in this country. A strong far-right group that's anti-Russia, anti-communist, even now in 2025, not to be outdone by a lot of far-left groups, groups so far left that they can't understand why the Columbia students' demonstrations turned into violent confrontations. The president of Columbia had to resign because she didn't act in any way toward it. The $400 million now been taken away from a fund that was earmarked for Columbia previously by the administration. And a lot of these counter actions are really, in a way, reactions to the extreme politics that's being practiced in so many places. I just can't believe that you've got people, and actually there was a Jewish group that marched to have Mahmoud Khalil have him released and the charges dropped against him. And if there was ever a case where a person should have charges brought against him, it's his, because though he didn't commit any violence, he advocated for it very clearly. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard to understand what's happening here. I mean, those movements, again, you could have a legal position. First, I think he can be deported. It can be decided in the courts. But to come out on his side, making him out to be some kind of a folk hero, when he's an evil person, he's a supporter of Hamas, he's anti-Semitic, anti-Israel.
Yeah,
and
this is not Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama.
No, this is not at all. It's not Gandhi. This is, and yet they make him out to be a folk hero. To me, it would be like if you found out that some serial killer, there was some technicality in the evidence, and maybe he should be acquitted because that. But you don't go out and say what a great person that serial killer is. You say so. And I just found this, and they all have their red shirts on, and they're all uniformed, and they're ready to go, and they're organized. And you wonder, what they're learning in school, how out of touch they can be. But it's also, we are in many ways, we're in a war right now. I mean, Israel is our ally. Hamas is an enemy. You have Iran, Russia, they're all supporting Hamas. And yet, if anyone to be allying themselves, you could disagree with Israel's policy. That's fine. I don't, but you could. I understand that. But to somehow make it out that Hamas represents any kind of a force of good is absolutely insane, and it's dangerous to the country. And so anyway, it's things have gotten too far. I think maybe it's a combination of cable TV.
Yes, exactly.
Talk shows, not ours.
Look at us.
Course.
We're on cable TV as well as WABC in New York. We're going to come back with the final part of our discussion before we turn it over to Vinny Medunia, who I'm sure will have music that will be soothing to your ears after listening to the babbling of the two of us for the last hour. We'll be right back.
It's the left versus the right. It's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
We're back on the left versus the right. David Paterson and Peter King. We've already thrown a couple of cheers, but that's during the commercials. We're sitting here pretending to like each other. But the reality is that this is one of the more outstanding leaders that we produced from New York, who conducted himself in Washington with class, with respect, and with, I think, always open arms to a discussion with the other party. And speaking of that, Peter.
Well, thank you, David.
President Trump, now there's some people think that the 22nd Amendment doesn't ban him for running for a third term, but it's generally believed that the courts would not uphold that. And yet, there will be another election. It's 2028. It's not too early to start thinking about who might be running or what the tone of the party would be. And so I'm a Democrat that always wants to know what Republicans are thinking.
It's going to be interesting because Donald Trump is, in many ways, but even in his policies, is very different from almost any Republican up till now. He's more isolationist. He's certainly not totally free trade. His tone is really harkens back to maybe the 30s or 40s in many ways. And I don't know whether if he's totally changed the grassroots of the party. He may have. I mean, in 2015 when he first announced, he was sort of looked upon as a quirk, a person on the fringes. Even when he won the election in 2016, some people thought it was more of rejection of Hillary and 8 years of Democratic rule than it was for Donald Trump and his policies. But now, the 4 years he was out of office, he really built up at the grassroots. He controls the party more than anyone's ever had a hold on the party. I remember talking to people in the Bill Clinton White House when Democrats would be voting against President Clinton, congressmen and senators, and his staff would say, what can we really do? You try to threaten them, persuade them and everything.
Right.
But, what can you do? Well, somehow Donald Trump knows what to do. I mean, I've never seen anyone following marching orders like Republicans are now. Now, will that survive when Donald Trump leaves? Is there a coherent Trump policy, or is it just taking advantage and making positive use of anger that's out there? Right now, I guess J.D. Vance would be certainly somebody following in the Trump tradition. Someone like Marco Rubio, even though he is the Secretary of State, he was more of a traditional Republican on foreign policy. realizing what he thought was the importance of America being involved in world affairs. So it's going to be now. We may though be in better shape than Democrats, who seem to have no idea. No one is a strong leader. And also, I would advise both parties. Republicans don't think we're never going to lose again, and why Democrats are panicking. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Lyndon Johnson beat Barry Goldwater in 1964. That was the end of the Republican Party. Republicans can never come back. 4 years later, we elected the ultimate Republican, Richard Nixon. 8 years later, he was out because of Watergate. The Republicans are finished, and then 4 years later, Ronald Reagan came back. So, I mean, it's there. The people, the American people are not locked in ideologically like many people at the top are, and they will go to a common sense candidate. So if Donald Trump does a great job in these 4 years, and somebody from his wing of the party, whatever wing that is. It's more like a Trump wing. It's not a conservative wing or a liberal wing or a moderate wing. It's Donald Trump, because many of the views he's taken on foreign policy sound more like George McGovern than Ronald Reagan. And yet, he gets the hardcore right to go with him on that. On the other hand, he's very pragmatic. I think he's, when it comes to law and order, when it comes to easing government regulations and allowing businesses to move forward and create jobs. That's very much in the Republican tradition. So is he sui generis, or is it a whole philosophy he's building, which is going to have followers? I don't know.
Well, it's going to be a big shadow to try to replace in 2028. We're going to not release what I'm about to say.
Well, I'll keep it secret. Okay?
I'm a big fan of Marco Rubio. I don't know why. Even when he was a candidate in 2020, I thought it was 2016 he first ran, right?
Yeah,
against Trump.
2016, yeah.
And
very personal between the two of them too.
Oh yeah, well if you get called Little Marco enough, you'll get pretty upset. And it's amazing how they've worked that out over the years, where President Trump and some others who he's had problems with did not. But it's really going to be a test for the leadership of this country. And I think, past his prologue, that the party that comes across as being more reasonable, more legitimately concerned, and has a plethora of issues that they can list. You can't say, I'm going to reverse the policies of the previous administration. Well, every administration had about 50 policies, so you've said absolutely nothing while trying to make a name for yourself. That is going to be, I think, a very interesting period. But, of course, that's 2 or 3 years from now. Right now we have our own sort of issues. And we alluded to this earlier, but the issue of where people are standing is quite interesting from years ago. What was interesting about, you mentioned Barry Goldwater, he kind of came back like in the late 70s and 80s, made a lot of public speeches and went on a Larry King radio show and things like that. And he said he was saying the same things he said in 1964, but nobody would listen to him back then. So it's not always whether or not you have the right ideas, but how you present those ideas that's so important in your career. What did you see as the most difficult issues? Were there any that you weren't totally sure? I mean, you're an elected official. You want to project a positive view one way or the other. But was there anything that was ever kind of in the back of your head when you were serving?
Yeah, I would say healthcare is tough. I mean, I was against what's called Obamacare, but on the other hand, there are definitely deficiencies in our system. To me, is how you can provide more care without turning into a government-run program. And to me, that to me is a really tough issue. I think it's wrong for Republicans to say we're going to abolish Obamacare and all. Okay, fine. There are parts of it maybe, but you have to be careful. And it's so that was tough on that. And then always on foreign policy issues. I mean, war and peace. The reality is, if you're voting for or against a war, and I voted for the Iraq War, and I still think it was the right thing to do. Maybe it was handled wrong, but that's another story. But I made a point with my wife and me that we went to the wake of every soldier in my district who was killed because you owed it to those families to be there. That to me is really tough because it's easy for you and I to sit back and say, oh, we should kill these guys, we should do that, we should do that. You realize even in the most quote-unquote successful war, a lot of good young men and women are going to get killed. And you have to take that into account.
My issue was the death penalty.
Okay.
You know, I grew up Catholic and felt that, you know, God gave us this life, and when he's ready to take it away, he'll take it away. That, you know, there should be no intervention on our part. If this person is really that bad, just lock him up and give him life without parole. But every time there was a case where somebody was executed for killing someone after a trial and, the verdict of a jury, I was like, good, get him out of here. I mean, that was a little part of me, like the id in me that really hates what some of these people did, and I'm trying to keep calm
was
demeanor.
that your toughest job as governor? I mean, actually, there was no death penalty cases that came up at that time, but I think
the death penalty for me was just going before the legislature.
Well, that's right, and that's no one deserves that. But like governors in states where they have to decide whether or not to give clemency at the end or to keep somebody from being executed.
You know, Congressman, there was a woman named Judy Clark, and for everything that I know, she was one of the people who fired the guns at the security people and the police officer and the police officers. They killed 2 cops and they killed 2 security people up in, it was on its way upstate in that shooting, the Brinks truck.
Okay,
the Brinks robbery.
Yeah, right.
And she apparently was such a troublemaker that they sent her to prison in Arizona. And even in Arizona, she almost broke out of prison there. She did all these things, and then something came over her, and she became this voice of peace, this voice of justice. She helped other inmates. She taught inmates how to read. She did all these things, and there was a huge movement, particularly in the progressive part of the Democratic Party, for me to commute her sentence, for me to give her clemency. And I just couldn't do it because even to this day, 2025, and now that's like, I think over 20 years.
70s, I guess.
Yes, since the incident happened, they still have a memorial for the people who were shot that day. And I just felt that I couldn't do it. And one time I was in the cleaners and this woman walked up to me and just got on my case about this. She was with this group that was trying to get her that way, and I was so upset. I came back to another radio station I was working on at the time, and I just went off about how unfair it was for these people to treat me this way. And then during the show, we got a call from Judith Clark's attorney, and Judith Clark said, I called Judith and told her what was going on, and she said to me, the governor gave me a fair opportunity to be heard. He chose not to let me out of jail, and I accept his decision. She later was commuted by Governor Andrew Cuomo about 4 or 5 years later, and I hope she's gone on to lead a wonderful life because after all the terrible things she did, apparently she really became a very decent person at the end. But I just couldn't do it.
I understand that. Wow, that is a tough decision. It's also, that's, again, another criticism that's going on. I think with the parole board, there's so many cop killers who have been let out, and I think you have to, and I've never been in that position, but I think you have to realize, besides the person you're dealing with, what impact does that have on society?
And their families.
Yes, that's, I mean, and the families, yeah, because a number of those cops lived in my district, and you talk to the Piagentini family and others, and when their husband's killer and son's killer was let out, the family was hard. Not that they even wanted revenge; it was just somehow it felt like that their husband or their son, his life didn't mean anything.
He's in a box.
Yeah.
And these other people, even though they were in jail, they're walking around now.
Yeah.
They can live out their lives, and they can do what theoretically what Judy Clark did is reform themselves, but that doesn't happen very often, and that was why I felt that way. So what do you think of the great success of WABC Radio, John Catsimatidis, Katz and Cosby, and all these shows? They're always asking you to come on and give your point of view. This is really quite a new way for New Yorkers to communicate with each other.
It's been a great experience for me, except for dealing with Sid Rosenberg. I mean, that's always hearing how great he is. No, he's a great guy. This is really like it's 2025, and in many ways, it's like going back to the 60s and 70s, bringing back the best of New York. I thought the first decision I remember John making when he said he was taking over WABC, which had become almost defunct. It was all syndicated shows from around the country, no real relation.
How many vitamins can you take before you kill yourself?
When he said he was going to bring back Cousin Brucey, and that somehow was like a metaphor for traditional New York returning. And he has the fact he's such an eclectic mix of politicians on the air, left, right, in between. You have Frank Morano, who's off in space somewhere. You have Roger Stone, who got pardoned. I mean, you have all these cast of characters you wouldn't find anywhere else. But they're all talented. They all have ability. And then Sid Rosenberg, obviously, it had been Bernie and Sid, now Sid. And John's own show. I mean, Cats at 5, Cats Roundtable. It brings everyone in the room, and it's out there. I mean, listen, all of the wonderful, phenomenal things I did in Congress, where I almost saved the world. People talk to me more now about being on Sid on Wednesday morning or being on Cats at 5 on Cats and Cosby Monday afternoons. So it really has made an impact among real people who don't even fully realize it's become part of their life now. They assume everybody is listening to WABC. And
it's got people on both sides talking to each other.
Yeah.
I came up with a pretty good friend of mine who I served in the legislature in Albany. When did you become such a conservative? I'm not a conservative. Times change, and your views about different things they develop over the years. Well, Congressman Peter King, you, as usual, have been outstanding. I hope you'll come back on this show again. If you need money, I'll give it to you. And we just really enjoyed having you here. You've had a rich amount of experience. You should have been a history professor, but we'll leave that out for now. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next Saturday on the left versus the right. It will be me versus a person to be named later.